Hello and welcome, Shoot for the Stars Conventioneers. My name is Allison. I have been a doll collector all my life. In reality, I just never stopped collecting dolls. And I'm here today because our friend Rachel asked me to teach you guys about doll scale. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about different scales of dolls. So you can see I have a lot of different dolls here in different sizes. So starting at the very end, I have a Nendroid doll that is usually considered to be 1/12. And then I have some tiny BJDs. I have an Atelier Mimoni Mellow and I have a Poupees Jude, which are generally considered to be 1/8, and they normally in the BJD community would be called tinies. The next size up, we have some familiar faces here. We have a Blyth and a Barbie, and those are generally considered to be 1/6 scale. Now in the BJD community, even though I don't have a 1/6 BJD here, this would normally be called Yo SD size, in case you've heard that term before. The next dolls I've got here are 1/4 size dolls, and in the BJD community they would typically be referred to as MSD size dolls. And you notice we have our star of the show, Miss Ellen Wild, here today with us to help us with this. And then we have on the far end some 1/3 scale dolls, and this is what would typically be referred to in the BJD community as SD size. So these are all the sizes that we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to show you guys all about different scales and what they mean and how to calculate them. So that's going to be fun, because not only do I love dolls, but I love math, and it's so joyful for me to be able to share my love of dolls with you and also to be able to combine it with math. So let's find out why scale is so important for us to understand as doll collectors. Scale is important, I think, for two reasons, and there's probably lots of other reasons besides these two, but these are the two that are in my mind. The first one is just for the sake of knowing. I'm a very curious person by nature, and if I see something printed on something that I buy frequently, like doll accessories, I want to know what it means. I want to understand how they arrive at that scale and what does it mean when compared to my dolls. The second thing is buying accessories. So, you know, most of us buy our doll accessories and props and furniture online these days, and when you can't physically go and see something and hold it in your hands, it can be hard to determine, is that going to fit the doll that I have it intended for in my mind? And you can alleviate some heartache and some headache for yourself by understanding scale and knowing what it means. So let's look at some examples here. First of all, there is this Pac-Man arcade game, and they make these in 1/4 scale. This one was actually made for American Girl dolls, but you can buy them through various different retailers, but they're 1/4 scale. So if I were buying this and I were thinking to myself, I really want to buy this Pac-Man arcade game for my Blyth dolls. If you look at Blyth, Blyth is 1/6 scale, and you set her next to Pac-Man, you know, that's not going to work. You see, the scale does not work for these two dolls, this doll and this accessory together. It's not a good combo. Now, if you're just wanting to take pictures, you could do some forced perspective things, especially because Blythe's head is so big, and you could kind of fake a picture in here to get her playing the Pac-Man game. But if you're wanting it for a display piece, this doesn't display well together, in my opinion. So that's one thing that can help you, you know, understanding, is it going to work with my doll? Another example is this chair. This chair is also a 1/4 scale. So it's 1/4 scale, but with chairs there can be a little bit more leniency in what you're doing. So for example, Blyth, you know, if she sits on it, her feet are definitely not going to touch the floor. It is a little big for her, but maybe you wouldn't mind displaying her like this. You know, that'd be up to you. But you know, she can look to the side and do things like that, but you would know, knowing that your Blyth is 1/6 scale, that a 1/4 scale couch or seat like this is kind of going to swallow her up. So it's going to be too big for her. Here's another example. This is a 1/6 size chair. So this is 1/6 size, and if you saw this chair and you were thinking that would be perfect for Ellen, but you know that Ellen is 1/4 size, she is not going to be able to sit in this chair. So that's why scale is so important to understand, because when you're out there shopping for doll accessories, you want to be sure that if it's specifically for a doll that you are intending it for, if you understand the scale, then you can get the right thing from the get-go. Now, I have bought things before that came and they were a totally different size than what I expected. And luckily for me, I have dolls in different sizes, so I was able to give it to another doll, so to speak. But if you have something really specific in mind that you're wanting, it can be really disappointing when something arrives and it's not the size that you think it's going to be, and it's not up to your expectation of what doll you want to use it for. So understanding the scale and knowing how it works can help you out so much with those things. So all that being said, now let me actually show you what scale is, how it's derived, and how to calculate it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what scale actually means, and we're going to start with the 1/12th, and we're going to start with the 1/12th Harry Potter Nendoroid, and you know it's 1/12 because I told you it's 1/12, but what does 1/12 actually mean? What it means is that for every 1 unit on the doll, so I'm going to say 1 unit on the doll, that means in real life there are 12 units in real life. So units are your measure. What are you measuring by? We're going to use inches today. So today our units are going to equal inches, but it'll work exactly the same if you wanted to use centimeters or feet or whatever. So 1 unit on the doll, 12 units in real life. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure this Harry Potter Nendoroid, and if I measure him from top to bottom, he is roughly about 4 inches. You can kind of see that when I lay that down. He's a little bit shorter than 4 inches, but we're going to say, well, really from the top of his head down to the bottom of his feet, he's about 4 inches. So the doll has 4 units in total, or 4 inches. So we want to figure out what size he is in real life. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the scale of what he is going to be. He's been scaled down. We're going to see what his real life size would be. So we're going to do 4 times 12 because it is 12 units in real life, and 4 times 12 is 48. So in real life he would be 48 inches tall, which is going to be 4 feet because of course there's 12 inches in a foot. That just kind of works out for this first scale. So he would be 4 feet tall. So what we need to think about now is, does 4 feet tall really make sense for Harry Potter? Well, if we're talking about, his first year when he was 8 years old, a lot of 8-year-olds are 4 feet tall. That is a reasonable height for an 8-year-old. So that's how we know that we calculated our scale correctly. So that's kind of what you're looking at with scale. You're looking at, this has been shrunk down, but in real life, what would the size of this person be if we were talking about real life? Now, what we aren't really going to talk about as much today, I am going to bring it up a little bit, is proportions. You can see this doll, the head proportion is probably exaggerated as to what it would really be. So that's one of the cool things about dolls, is that we have, there's artistic license and you can do fantastic proportions or like fantasy proportions with these dolls. And so they're not always in proportion to their scale, if that makes sense. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with a couple of other dolls, but I just wanted to bring that up because, a lot of these aren't meant to actually be to scale models. They're just, if we're looking at height, you can kind of get a feel for what the height of the person or the doll would be in real life. Okay, the next 2 dolls we're going to talk about are Poupees Jude and Atelier Mimoni Mellow. And these are typically considered to be 1/8 scale dolls. So for every 1 unit on the doll, that's going to be 8 units in real life. Now, one of the things that we didn't talk about with the last doll is that, some people do age their dolls differently. So while some people may look at these as toddlers, some people may look at them as 8 or 9-year-olds, and that does make a little bit of a difference. When you're doing scale, something may not necessarily make sense at that age, but I look at these girls as around 8-ish years old, maybe 6. But anyway, let's measure them. I think they're the same height. In fact, yeah, they pretty much are. So if I put my measuring tape down, you can see they're right at 6 inches tall. So they're both right about 6 inches. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now calculate how tall they would be in real life. So we've got 6 inches on the doll, and what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that by 8 units, because for every one of those 6 inches there's 8 real life units. 6 times 8 is going to be 48 inches. So we've got 48 inches here. And now remembering that there's 12 inches for every foot, if we divide 48 by 12, that gives us 4 feet. So if these girls are 8 years old, does 4 feet make sense? It does to me. I've known a lot of 8-year-olds that were about 4 feet tall. So that does make sense as far as their age and their height would go. So that is 1/8 scale. Okay, next up we've got Barbie and Blyth. And Barbie and Blyth are 1/6 scale. So for every 1 unit on the doll, there are 6 units in real life. Now these two are 2 different sizes. So what we're going to do is we are going to do them separately, where we've done the last couple together. So let's measure Barbie first. Barbie is famously 11.5 inches tall, so we really don't need to measure her, but just to show you, if we go from the top of her head down to the tip of her feet, that is right at 11.5 inches. So Barbie is 11.5 inches tall, and then we're going to multiply that by 6, because for every unit there are 6 units in real life. So 6 times 5 is 30. Let's see, that's 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 6. So in real life, Barbie would be 69 inches tall. So if we divide 69 by 12, or the way I think about it, I'm 5 feet tall, so that's 60 inches. So I know that Barbie is 5 feet and 9 inches tall. And that makes sense for Barbie's age, because Barbie is a mature, fully grown, adult or late teenager. And so for her to be 5 feet 9 inches tall totally does make sense, especially considering that I'm a woman that's older than Barbie would be, and I'm 5 feet tall. So that makes sense for her. So now let's look at Blyth. So Blyth is, let's see, let's measure her here. I'm going to put her to the sideways. And Blyth is, from the top of her head down to the bottom of her feet, she's right at 11 inches. So all the way from the top down to the bottom, we've got right about 11 inches for Blyth. So we're going to give her, let's see, 11, we'll put her work down here, 11 inches. We've got 11 times 6. Well, 11 times 6 is 66 inches. So Blyth is 66 inches in real life, which would be 5 foot or 5 feet and 6 inches tall, which again, that makes sense to me. I think 5 foot 6 inches is about the average woman's height. I could be wrong about that, but I'm thinking that's about what it is. And Blyth to me is a teenager. That's the age that I usually assign her. I see her as a teenager, or sometimes depending on the body they're on, actually maybe even, an early 20s kind of adult, because a lot of people change the bodies on Blyths. But she does have a little bit of a mature body, maybe even like a tween body. So really she could be, early teens up to early adulthood in my opinion. But I think 5 feet 6 inches is totally reasonable for her to be. But now that we've said all that, what I want to talk to you about is proportion, because I said we weren't going to talk a lot about proportion, but these 2 dolls especially, they have interesting proportions, both of them do. So I want to just kind of go over that a little bit with you guys while we have them here, just for the fun of it. So for starters, let's look at Blyth. Blyth has the most disproportionate head of all the dolls I own. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually measure the circumference of her head just for fun to show you guys. So if we measure around Blyth's head, her head all the way around is, it's about 10.5 inches around. So my tape is back there where my finger is. It's about 10.5 inches around. So if she was proportionate as well as to scale, that would be 10.5 inches in real life. And we would times that by the 6 units for her scale. That would be, let's see, 6 times 0 is 0, carry the 3. That would make her head 63 inches around, which means she would have a 5 foot or 5 feet and 3 inches around head, which is crazy, right? Nobody has a head that size. But it's interesting to talk about with her because she just has those wild proportions. But again, that's an artistic thing, and that's one of those cool fantasy things that we have with our dolls, because without that big old head, she wouldn't be able to change her eyes and do all the fun stuff that we know Blyth is able to do. So in order to get all those fun effects, there has to be a great big head that we can put that changing eye mechanism in. So I think that's just fun to point out how proportion is a little bit different than scale as far as that goes. But height wise, I think the height is good, and height really is mostly what you're going to be concerned about when you're looking for accessories for your dolls, because you're going to be looking for different furniture and things like that. Now Barbie famously has unrealistic proportions. You know, she's quite thin, and she's got, you know, a big chest, and etc., etc. But you know, again, for the proportions, I'm not as concerned about that when I'm looking at the scale, and when I'm looking to buy something for Barbie, it doesn't matter to me, you know, when you're trying to buy a piece of furniture, or you're trying to buy something, like if you're going to buy like a piece of fake food, like a little cupcake for your doll, you know, you don't want to buy something that's 1/3 scale for Barbie, because it's going to be very overwhelming. But really, for her body being the proportions that it is, that doesn't really matter, I feel like, when we're shopping for accessories for our dolls. So I just wanted to talk about that, because both of these do have, Barbie famously has unrealistic proportions, and Blyth, just look at that head. I mean, she's got a massive head. So anyway, I just thought that would be fun to look at while we were looking at their scale. Okay, next up we've got 1/4 scale. So we're going to be looking at our Miss Ellawyn Wild, and we are going to be looking at a Kathy Cruz Labella doll. So for every 1 unit on these dolls, we're going to have 4 units in real life. Now, I see these as different ages. Ellawyn, of course, is late teens, early 20s, and I see the Labella dolls as early teens. So I see them more as like a 14, maybe 12 to 14-year-old doll. But if you look at them side by side, they're actually the same height. So I'm going to show you guys this. If we set them together side by side here, and we measure them out, they are both right at 16 inches. So if I do Ellawyn, and I think Ellawyn, most people know that she's, you know, 16 inches tall, and then the Labella doll is pretty much the same thing. She might be like a hair shorter, but we're going to say, for the sake of ease, that she is also right at that 16 inches. So we've got both of them at 16 inches tall. And what we're going to do is we are now going to calculate what their height in real life would be. So it looks like we rubbed off some of the ink there. So we've got 16 inches on the doll, and we want to see what they're going to be in real life. So we're going to do 16 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24, carry the 2, 4, 5, 6. So that's 64 inches in real life, which is going to be 5 feet 4 inches tall. And that makes sense to me. So what that means is that Ellawyn is kind of a petite woman. I mean, I think 5'3" and under is considered petite, so she might be more average sized at 5'4". And Amy here, she is going to be, you know, probably reaching the top of her growth spurt. I know I stopped growing in my early teens, but it makes sense for her at that age to be 5 foot 4 inches tall. So it's just interesting to me to figure out the real life size of these dolls. I always have fun kind of thinking about that and working through that. But that is our quarter scale dolls. And so there are a lot of great quarter scale accessories out there for our dolls, and so I think it's just fun to understand how that works for them. So that, but you can see how differently sized they are, because Elowin is like a thin, slim fashion doll, where the Labella doll, I mean, look at her head, the differences in the size of their head and their overall body. So they're both the same scale, but proportionally, they're very different. And so that's one of those things, like we've been talking about, the difference between, you know, just the scale of height. We're really just talking about the scale of the height versus the actual proportional scale. So just wanted to point that out, because while they're the same scale, they're very different dolls. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about our 1/3 scale doll. So we've got 1 unit on the doll, and that's going to equate to 3 units in real life. Now, I have 2 of them here, 2 1/3 scale dolls, and they're very different sizes. So let's start with Smart Doll Justice. I'm going to lay her out to the side and measure her so we can see what her height is. And from the bottom of her shoes to the top of her head, she is right at 24 inches. So you can see that. So we're going to have 24 inches on the doll. And we're going to multiply that by 3, because this is 1/3, or this is, 1/3 scale. So 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So she is our tallest lady so far at 72 inches tall. So we've got to divide that by 12. 72 inches divided by 12 is 6 feet tall. So now, does that make sense for Smart Doll? Yes, because Smart Doll is a full-grown woman. She is, I think they're supposed to be 17 years old, but most people are full-grown around 17. And my best friend is 6 feet tall, and she was at 17 years old. So that totally makes sense for Smart Doll to be 6 feet tall. So now let's look at Labelle's du jour, Siren. So let's measure her up. She, from her head to her, actually let's pull her out sideways. From her head to her toes, she is right at 21 inches. So at 21 inches on the doll, and then we're going to do that times 3. So that's 3, 6. She's 63 inches in real life. So that makes her 5 feet and 3 inches tall, which totally makes sense for a full-grown woman, because she is, you know, an older, mature doll. And when you look at them side by side, that it does make sense for them to be the same age. They're in the same scale. Now their head sizes are a little different. Of course, their body shapes are different, but you know, proportionally, they're not necessarily the same. But if we look at the scale of heights, that does make sense, because between full-grown adults, you know, you can have that sort of height difference. So I think that's interesting to see. So now that you've seen how, you know, scale works and how it applies to your dolls, what if you have a doll that you want to figure out for yourself what the scale is? So let's look at that. Okay, so let's say you've got some dolls that you want to figure out the scale yourself, and you want to know exactly what their scale is so you can kind of figure out which accessories are going to work best. So how do you calculate your own scale? So there's a couple ways to do it. Now I'm going to show you the easy way, which is a shortcut way in my opinion, and then I'm going to show you the actual mathematical way to do it. So first of all, we're going to look at Cruisling's Joy. So what you want to do is you want to kind of think in your mind, where do you think this doll would fall as far as scale? And when I look at her, I think she's going to fall somewhere between 1/8 scale and 1/6 scale. I don't know which one probably, but I think it's one of those. What's in between 1/8 and 1/6 is actually 1/7. So she might fall along that scale, but the reason that I don't use those off scales is because typically accessories don't come in off scales. They'll come in 1/12, 1/8, 1/6. So you want to find what you're closest to. So what I'm going to do is, I think she's between 1/8 and 1/6. I'm going to measure her height to see what she is in inches, and she is 9 inches tall. So if she's 9 inches tall, and I look at them as around 8 years old, so I think they're about 8 years old. That's, you know, kind of what I assign their age at, between 8 and 10, something like that. So 9 inches tall, if I times that by 8, 9 times 8 is going to be, what is that, 72? It's been a while since I've done my times tables. So 72 inches is going to be 6 feet tall. You know, that seems really tall for an 8-year-old. I'm not saying there aren't any, but it seems a little bit too tall. So I'm thinking 1/8 is really not her scale. I'm thinking she's more like a 1/6 scale. And if you think about the size of these dolls, they're kind of similar to Skipper. And you know, Skipper is Barbie's little sister, so that does make sense. So let's try her as a 1/6 and see if that makes more sense. So we've got 9 inches, and then we've got 9 times 6, which is 54 inches. So 54 inches is going to be 4 feet, let's see, 46 inches tall. That makes more sense to me. So it makes more sense to me for her to be around 4 foot 6 inches tall. Now, if you want to calculate your scale mathematically, you've got to know 2 things. So we know the height of the doll is 9 inches, and let's say I want her to be 4 feet tall. So what I need to do is I need to convert that to inches. 4 feet in inches is 48 inches. And so now you have a fraction here, and you just simplify the fraction. So I think I can take 3 out of both of these. So it's going to be 3 out of, let's see how many times 3 goes into 48. That's 1 minus 3 is 1 and 8. 3 goes into 18. What is it? 15, 5, 6 times. So minus 18 is 0. So that would be 16. So the real scale, if you want her to be 4 feet tall, is going to be 3 out of 16. So that's how you get to it mathematically. But I don't think that's as useful for what we're looking at, because things don't come in 3/16 scale. You know, they come in 1/8 or 1/6 scale. And so really she's the closest to 1/6. So let's look at a couple other dolls. Let's look at Poupees' Carla doll now. And Poupees dolls are quite popular, and I've had a lot of questions about their scale. So let's look at calculating her scale. So first of all, let's measure her out. She is right at 12 inches tall, so that makes it easy. So she is 12 inches tall. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the method of just figuring out what she's closest to. In my opinion, she's somewhere between 1/6 and 1/4 scale. So I want to figure out which of those scales is closer to what she is. So we're going to try it with 1/6 scale. So if we do 12 inches times 6, let's see, that's 6 times 2 is 12, 7, that's 72 inches. And that would make her in real life 6 feet tall. Now, depending on the age, and I don't think Poupees dolls are much more than, I don't know, 12 years old. I think 6 feet tall is a little tall for her. So I want to try her at 1/4 scale. So if we try her at 1/4 scale, that's 12 inches times 4, because you know it's 1 out of 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4, that's 48 inches. And 48 inches would be 4 feet tall. So I honestly think that's also a little short for, you know, a 10 to 12 year old, but she's somewhere in between there. So honestly, what does that tell me? If she's in between 1/6 scale and she's in between 1/4 scale, I could probably use accessories for either one for her. Because she's so much bigger than the 1/6 scale, probably the furniture's not going to work well at that scale, but maybe food props and other things like that. So that's the sort of thing you want to think about. She's in between scales, really. in my opinion. You know, maybe 4 feet tall is pretty accurate if you look at her. We've been saying a lot, the 4 feet has come up a lot with 8-year-old children. So if you look at her as an 8-year-old and you think that's a good 4 foot is a good size for that, then, you know, let's put her in the 1/4 category. So anyway, that's how you would calculate for her. Okay, so now let's look at Ruby Red Fashion Friends Maya. And I know that the Ruby Red Fashion Friends are very popular, and a lot of you probably have one of these. So let's measure her out. She is 14.5 inches tall. So I want to know what scale she is. I think she's probably 1/4 scale. That's what my gut says. But she might, no, she's not 1/6. She might even be up to 1/3 scale, depending on what age you assign her. So I look at her definitely, because she has a little bit of a mature body, I look at her as a tween. So I look at her as, you know, somewhere up to 14 years old. So she's 14.5 inches. Let's test the 1/4 scale and see if that works for her. So I'm going to do 14.5 times 4, and we're going to see if it makes sense. So 5 times 4 is 20, 4 times 4, 16, 17, 18, and that's 5. That puts her at 58 inches tall, which is 4 feet and 10 inches. Yes, 4 feet and 10 inches tall. So that's definitely, that's on the short side, so she might be 1/6 scale. So let's check her out at 1/6 scale just to see. So let's do 14.5 times 6. 6 times 5 is 30, 6 times 4 is 24, 25, 26, 27, 6, 7, 8. That puts her at 87 inches tall, which is well over, let's see, that's well over 7 feet tall. So she's definitely not going to be, she's not going to be 1/6 scale, because she would be over 7 feet tall in that scenario. So really she's going to be closest to 1/4 scale, even though at 1/4 scale she'd be 4 feet 10 inches tall, which I feel like is a little short. But that's kind of the thing with this, you know, some of these dolls are in between scales, and so you just want to go with what's going to make the most sense for you. And what makes the most sense for her, in my opinion, would be 1/4 scale. And let's look at one last doll that's very popular that all of you probably know of and have either seen or had one. Okay, the last doll we're going to look at today is American Girl, and they are famously 18 inches tall. And you have got to have probably owned one of these at some point in your collection if you don't have one now. So, but what scale are they? To me, I think they're not gonna be on the low end of the scale, right? They're gonna be at least 1/4 scale or maybe 1/3 scale. So let's figure out what makes the most sense. Now the American Girls I think are supposed to be 8 years old. I see them up to 12 sometimes. That's just me. And that's again one of those things, like I take license with my dolls and I decide myself, you know, what age and maturity level I see them at. But let's test her out at 1/4 scale. So if we do 18 times 4, we've got 8 times 4 is 32. And let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 72 inches tall. She would be 6 feet tall. Yeah, she would be 6 feet tall at 8 years old. I think that's a little tall. Not saying that never happened, but you know, let's try the 1/3 scale. So we've got 18 times 3. 8 times 3 is 24. 3, 4, 5, that's 54 inches. So that is 4 feet and, let's see, 6 inches tall. So 4.5 feet tall. That makes much more sense to me. So American Girl dolls are 1/3 scale, which is interesting because I showed you guys that Pac-Man arcade game earlier, and it's actually an American Girl accessory, but it's 1/3 scale. But if you look at the pictures of the doll with the arcade game, the doll is actually as tall as the arcade game, and that's because the arcade is only 1/4 scale. And I don't know if you guys have ever played an arcade game before, an arcade cabinet, but I have never been taller than any of those in my life. And so it wouldn't make sense that actually an 8-year-old girl is going to be taller than the Pac-Man game. And so that's just an interesting thing about scale to point out there, is that even though that's something that American Girl sells as a accessory for this doll, it's actually not to scale with the doll. It's to scale as to the original Pac-Man game, quarter scale, but this doll is 1/3 scale, and so they're technically not the same scale, but you can see that it works anyway. So all that being said, you know, scale, while it is an exact science and you can figure these things out, just because something is a different scale doesn't mean it's not going to work for your doll. So don't get hung up on, well, this is only 1/4 scale, it's not going to work for my 1/3 scale dolls. So the point of this is to just kind of show you like how it works and how you can look at things if you are looking to buy something or you're looking for an accessory for your doll. Alright y'all, thank you so much if you made it this far, because now we're at the end and you have officially completed the doll scale course. I hope that it was interesting for you, I hope that it was useful for you, and I hope that you'll be able to apply the things you learned in the future of your doll collecting as you're looking for props and accessories for your dolls. If you want to learn any more about the dolls that you've seen here today in this video, please make sure to follow my YouTube channel, which is Munecas, Poupees, and Dolls, which just means dolls, dolls, dolls in Spanish, French, and English. So that's what's on my channel, is lots of dolls, and I talk about dolls all the time. So if you're interested, please be sure to check that out. Thank you so much, Rachel, for inviting me to do this video for you guys. And again, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.